Queen? Not really, because she's still, our mother. I say speaking not the royal we, speaking for my sister and me. But she is she's our mother, and I think change happens, but I don't care what anyone says. This wasn't any sort of end game. She married the person she loved, and this is what...
The word spread through royal circles before dawn, and by breakfast they had become the only conversation inside palace corridors. Get him arrested now. No official statement confirmed those words. No palace spokesperson repeated them. Yet the rumor moved with astonishing speed, leaving advisors scrambling behind closed doors and sending royal watchers searching for answers. The name at the center of the storm stunned almost everyone. Not a senior royal, not a government minister, not a palace official. The whispers pointed instead to Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son, after claims emerged that King Charles's private estate had allegedly been used without the authorization some believed was required. Within hours, the story had grown into something far larger than a disagreement over property. If true, it threatened to expose a bitter struggle over privilege, influence, and the invisible boundaries that even members of the extended royal family are expected to respect. The silence inside Buckingham Palace did not break with a raised voice. It broke with a single sentence that spread through private corridors faster than any official announcement. According to rumors circulating among palace staff and royal commentators, Prince William had demanded immediate action after allegations surfaced that King Charles's private estate had been used without proper authorization. No official confirmation followed, yet the claim alone was enough to send advisors rushing into closed meetings while phones rang across royal offices before sunrise. What made the allegations so explosive was not simply the suggestion that someone close to the royal family had crossed a line. It was the name attached to it.
King Charles has named his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title held, of course, by his late father, Prince Philip, for more than 70 years. It had been the late Prince's wish for Prince Edward to be granted the dukedom after his death.
Reports and speculation pointed toward Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son, whose relationship with the royal family had always attracted public attention despite not being a working royal. If even part of the rumor proved accurate, the consequences could stretch far beyond one disputed event. It threatened to raise uncomfortable questions about privilege, authority, and who truly controlled access to the king's private estates. Within hours, royal correspondents were speaking of confidential discussions, while commentators wondered whether this was merely another exaggerated palace rumor or the beginning of something much larger. If Prince William had truly insisted on the strongest possible response, what information had reached him that convinced him the matter could no longer remain behind palace walls? Hi viewers! If you believe no one should be allowed to misuse the king's property simply because of who they are, don't just watch this story in silence. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another royal watcher who believes respect for the crown should always come before privilege. Every like and every subscription tells YouTube that people still care about accountability inside the monarchy, and every share helps make sure stories like this continue reaching viewers around the world. Stories like this remind many people why every detail inside the monarchy attracts such intense attention. If you enjoy careful royal investigations that separate public reports from palace speculation, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who follows the royal family. Every new discussion helps bring more voices into the conversation. The atmosphere inside the palace reportedly shifted almost overnight. Routine appointments quietly disappeared from schedules. Several senior estate officials were said to have been called into private meetings, while legal advisors reviewed long-standing procedures governing access to the king's personal properties. None of those meetings were announced publicly. Even so, their existence became the subject of intense speculation among royal observers who noticed an unusual pattern of activity unfolding behind closed doors. Those watching closely believed the concern centered on one question: had someone acted with genuine permission, or had assumptions about family access gradually replaced formal approval? The distinction mattered enormously.
First up, what is about to happen to former Prince Andrew as the fallout from the Epstein scandal deepens? And can the royal family, as we know it, survive? Today, Princess Kate was doing her best to put on a smile, and pretend it's business as usual as the police probe expands.
King Charles's private estates are not simply historic landmarks. They are privately managed properties operating under strict administrative rules, with access typically governed through established procedures rather than informal family arrangements. According to persistent palace rumors, one estate employee had quietly raised concerns after noticing inconsistencies in visitor records connected to a previous private gathering. Nothing dramatic appeared at first glance. The paperwork looked ordinary. Vehicle movements seemed routine. Guest arrivals blended into countless legitimate visits recorded over many months. Yet one small administrative detail reportedly refused to fit the rest of the file. That single inconsistency, insiders claimed, prompted an internal review. What began as a simple request for clarification allegedly expanded into a broader examination of authorization records, communication logs, and estate booking procedures. Each document answered one question while creating two more. Instead of closing the matter, every page appeared to deepen the uncertainty surrounding what had actually taken place. Outside the palace gates, the public knew almost nothing. Television cameras continued filming tourists gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Guards maintained their ceremonial routines with perfect precision. Visitors smiled for photographs, unaware that, according to royal speculation, advisors inside were debating an issue that could test personal loyalties at the highest level of the monarchy. Prince William reportedly received an early briefing summarizing the growing concerns. No official transcript has ever been released, and much of what followed remains the subject of informed speculation rather than verified public fact. Even so, several royal commentators later claimed that William's reaction was immediate. If procedures protecting the king's private property had been ignored, they alleged he believed the matter deserved a full review, regardless of who might be affected. For William, observers often describe duty as outweighing personal comfort. Throughout his public life, he has consistently emphasized accountability, stability, and protecting the institution he is expected one day to lead. Supporters argue that this reputation explains why reports of possible irregularities, however sensitive, would never be dismissed without careful examination. Meanwhile, attention slowly turned toward Tom Parker Bowles. A respected food writer and broadcaster in his own right, he had built a successful career independent of royal duties. Nevertheless, his connection to Queen Camilla meant every public appearance was viewed through a different lens. Ordinary invitations suddenly attracted extraordinary scrutiny. Harmless social events became headlines. In such an environment, separating rumor from reality became increasingly difficult. As speculation intensified, competing stories began circulating through London's media circles. One version claimed the entire controversy resulted from an innocent misunderstanding over estate permissions. Another suggested internal disagreements had existed for months, but remained hidden to avoid unnecessary public embarrassment. A third, far more dramatic version alleged confidential documents painted a much darker picture. None of those competing claims had been officially verified, yet each gained momentum as silence from palace officials continued. Behind that silence lay another mystery few outside the institution could answer. Why had no one spoken publicly to settle the matter? Experienced royal correspondents pointed out that the palace often refuses to comment on internal administrative issues, particularly when private estates are involved. That policy, intended to protect confidentiality, frequently allows speculation to grow unchecked. Inside one secure office, according to insider accounts that have never been independently confirmed, several thick folders were placed across a polished conference table. Estate correspondence, access records, internal memoranda, approval procedures. Each file represented another piece of a puzzle that seemed determined to resist easy answers. Advisors reportedly examined every page with unusual care, knowing that one overlooked detail could change the entire direction of the inquiry. Then, just as the review appeared ready to conclude as nothing more than an administrative misunderstanding, one newly surfaced document reportedly forced everyone in the room to stop reading and look at each other in complete silence. The name printed near the bottom of that page would transform an ordinary internal review into the most sensitive palace discussion anyone present had faced in years. Chapter 2. The heavy mahogany doors of the estate administration office slammed shut, sending a sharp echo down the stone corridor of Sandringham House. Outside, the autumn wind battered the tall, leaded windows, but inside the air was suffocatingly still. A thick manila folder hit the center of the table with a dull, heavy thud. Pages spilled across the dark wood, exposing row upon row of computer-printed access logs, handwritten gate sign-ins, and time-stamped security camera transcripts. Every eye in the room locked onto the paper at the top of the pile. "Look at the entry dates," a senior estate administrator said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly whisper. "Then check the official clearance registry for the exact same weekend." The discrepancy was stark, undeniable, and chilling. On 3 separate occasions over the previous 6 months, heavy commercial vehicles and private guests had entered restricted sectors of the King's private grounds. They had passed through security checkpoints during hours when the estate was officially listed as closed to all non-essential personnel. The signatures granting access did not belong to the estate warden. They did not belong to the head of security. The authorization code attached to the electronic barrier logs matched a private administrative profile that should never have had the power to override royal security protocols. Across the room, legal advisors exchanged silent, uneasy glances. Nobody wanted to say the name out loud, but it hung over the table like a physical weight. The administrative profile in question had been created during a routine departmental update, listed under an internal reference code tied directly to communications handled by Tom Parker Bowles' private liaison office. What had begun as a quiet administrative check was no longer an isolated mystery. The review was expanding, reaching into every corner of the royal property management system. Within hours, teams of auditors were quietly deployed across multiple locations.
Baton Windsor, as is now known, will have to face all of the consequences of whatever it is that is being investigated.
That they will want to look through before they can decide whether they have enough evidence. Is this going to take many months, perhaps even years?
At Sandringham, at Balmoral, and within the administrative wings of Windsor Castle, filing cabinets were unlocked and server archives were pulled for inspection. Correspondence files spanning nearly 2 years were laid out across long tables. Access logs were cross-referenced with fuel receipts, catering delivery records, and private maintenance requests. The deeper the auditors dug, the more complicated the picture became. Different factions within the palace infrastructure immediately began to fracture. On one side stood the traditionalists, senior estate administrators who had served the crown for decades under Queen Elizabeth II. To them, the records represented a catastrophic breach of protocol. Rules governing the monarch's private land were absolute, written into law and constitutional precedent. If private individuals, no matter how closely linked to the royal family by marriage, were using royal assets or granting unauthorized access to third parties, it undermined the very integrity of the Crown's private governance. On the other side stood advisors aligned with the modernizing efforts of the current reign. They argued passionately behind closed doors that the entire affair was being wildly blown out of proportion. They insisted the anomalous logs were nothing more than administrative oversight, the result of blurred lines during the chaotic transition of authority following the king's accession. In their view, informal arrangements had simply been misconstrued by overzealous staff members looking for controversy where none existed. The argument grew so heated during one late afternoon briefing that an advisor reportedly gathered his papers, stood up, and walked out of the room, leaving the legal team to deliberate in silence. Prince William, monitoring the situation through daily briefings, reportedly refused to accept vague assurances. Those close to the Prince of Wales described a man completely unyielding on matters of institutional compliance. William knew that the public mood had changed. The modern public demanded absolute transparency, and any perception that private royal estates were being treated as personal playgrounds for non-working relatives could prove devastating to the monarchy's reputation. He reportedly made his stance crystal clear to the legal team. There would be no sweeping this under the carpet. There would be no quietly reclassifying security violations as clerical errors to save face. Every single log entry had to be accounted for. Every signature had to be verified. If unauthorized access had taken place, the full truth had to be documented, regardless of who was named in the report. Yet as the investigation widened, the evidence seemed to resist simple answers. For every document that suggested an improper bypass of authority, another record emerged that seemed to contradict it. An email thread showed an estate manager discussing venue arrangements weeks prior to one of the flagged dates, implying that someone, somewhere, had known about the visits. But the formal approval form, the legal document required by estate bylaws, was missing from the physical archive. Had the paperwork been misplaced by negligent staff, or had it been intentionally withheld? The psychological strain inside the palace was palpable. Long-time employees who had worked side by side for years began watching each other with quiet suspicion. Conversations in the hallways ceased the moment an outsider walked past. The silence inside the palace walls was no longer peaceful. It was a defensive shield, holding back a storm of speculation that threatened to leak into the public domain at any second.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole focus of the book is about financial corruption in the royal family and how he's abused his position. I think what's worrying is that he was enabled and protected by a whole host of figures, both the diplomats, civil servants. But we've also got stories in the British papers this morning that the king was well aware of this.
Right now, as you listen to these quiet betrayals unfolding behind closed palace gates, ask yourself a hard question. If you are watching this story unfold and you choose to walk away without subscribing, are you truly interested in discovering the truth, or are you content letting powerful institutions hide their darkest secrets in the shadows? Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on all notifications, and leave your thoughts below, because turning a blind eye only lets the powerful control the narrative while the truth is buried forever. Outside the secure offices, the pressure was mounting exponentially. Media outlets had begun asking indirect questions about routine estate expenditures and security roster adjustments. While no major news organization had yet published concrete details, the nature of the inquiries made it clear that whispers had escaped the perimeter of the royal residences. The clock was ticking. The review team knew that if they did not establish a definitive timeline soon, the story would break in the press before the palace even understood the full extent of its own records. Advisors worked late into the night beneath the cold light of desktop monitors, comparing digital timestamps against physical gate logs. They analyzed communication records between staff members, searching for any pattern that could explain how administrative authority had become so dangerously scrambled. Then came the discovery that shifted the entire direction of the review. An analyst working through an archived database of internal memos uncovered a misfiled document from 18 months prior. It was a confidential administrative directive, signed not by an estate manager, but originating from a high-level private secretary's desk. The memorandum outlined a secondary framework for estate permissions, one that directly conflicted with the official legal guidelines governing the monarch's private property. The auditors sat back in their chairs, staring at the screen in disbelief. The document did not solve the mystery. It blew it wide open. It suggested that the conflicting authorizations were not the result of a single rogue decision or a simple misunderstanding by Tom Parker Bowles' office. Instead, it pointed toward a deeply embedded, undisclosed rift in how authority had been defined within the royal households after the transition of the crown. The legal team was immediately summoned back to the room. The discovery of the memorandum meant the investigation could no longer be treated as a localized estate issue. It was a systemic crisis of governance, touching upon the very boundaries of royal authority, private privilege, and legal accountability. As the late-night meeting stretched past midnight, the legal advisors sat around the table, the weight of the new document hanging heavily over them. The paper on the table proved that someone high within the palace hierarchy had authorized a completely parallel system of control. A confidential memorandum now pointed investigators toward an even larger, far more dangerous question. Who had given the order to create that secret channel of authority in the first place? Chapter 3. A teacup shattered against the hardwood floor of the private sitting room inside Buckingham Palace, sending porcelain fragments and dark tea splashing across the pristine rug. Nobody moved to clean it up. The sharp crack echoed through the high-ceilinged room, instantly killing the low chatter that had filled the air seconds earlier. Prince William stood near the tall window overlooking the private gardens, his hands clenched tightly behind his back, his shoulders rigid with anger. Across the table, two senior legal advisors sat motionless, their eyes fixed on the open red leather binder resting between them. The atmosphere was charged with an intensity that made the heavy velvet curtains feel like they were closing in on everyone present. "Explain to me how a parallel directive exists without my knowledge," William said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, carrying an edge that cut straight through the tension in the room. The senior legal counsel cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand. "Your Royal Highness, the paper appears to have been drafted during the administrative transition period. It was filed within a private internal registry that does not routinely report to the main Estate Governance Council." That explanation did nothing to calm the rising storm. The private meeting had been called under conditions of absolute secrecy. No official minutes were being taken by standard secretarial staff. Only the most trusted inner circle of advisors had been permitted inside the room. The discovery of the secondary framework had shattered any lingering hope that the dispute could be settled through a simple clerical audit. On the table lay three distinct documents, side by side. The first was the original Estate Governance Act, which clearly stated that all non-monarchic uses of private royal land required direct, written approval from the sovereign's official estate stewards. The second was the security log, showing multiple entries by individuals linked to Tom Parker Bowles's private associates. The third was the newly uncovered internal memorandum, which explicitly claimed to grant overridden administrative permissions under a broad, vaguely worded clause regarding family hospitality. The conflict between the three papers was complete, absolute, and dangerous. Legal experts sitting around the table compared the responsibilities laid out in historical precedent with the reality of modern institutional accountability. If the secondary directive was legally valid, then the visits were technically authorized, meaning no crime had been committed. However, if that directive was found to be an unratified private arrangement created without proper constitutional authority, every single entry made under its provisions became an illegal trespass on royal property. The psychological weight on the palace leadership was immense. The advisors were caught in an impossible vice. To validate the secondary memo meant admitting that private royal estates were being managed through secret, informal channels that bypassed official oversight. To invalidate it meant exposing non-working family members to potential legal scrutiny and public disgrace. Meanwhile, beyond the heavy oak doors, the media storm was beginning to gather strength. Outside the palace gates, broadcast trucks had parked along the mall. Telephoto lenses were aimed constantly at the private entrances, capturing every arrival and departure of senior legal staff. Speculation was exploding across digital platforms and international news networks. Journalists were dropping hints about a high-level rift between royal households, openly questioning whether the management of King Charles's private wealth was undergoing an undisclosed emergency investigation. Every headline added fuel to the fire. Every unconfirmed report increased the pressure on the people trapped inside the quiet rooms of the palace. Inside the meeting, William's frustration continued to build as competing accounts of private conversations emerged. One senior official claimed King Charles had given verbal approval for informal access procedures months ago, wanting to accommodate family members without burdening them with bureaucratic delays. Another advisor firmly denied this, insisting the king had never authorized any departure from strict statutory protocols, and was entirely unaware that the secondary directive even existed. The contradiction exposed a deeper, far more unsettling reality within the monarchy. The institution was wrestling with its own identity, caught between the old world of informal royal privilege and the modern demand for absolute legal transparency. If you are listening to this unfolding nightmare and you choose to scroll away right now without subscribing, you are actively choosing to ignore the truth behind how power really operates. The people in these rooms count on public apathy to keep their darkest secrets hidden behind closed doors. Click the subscribe button this instant, hit the notification bell, and drop your comment below, unless you prefer to stay blind while history is rewritten in secret. William's pace increased, his footsteps echoing softly off the parquet floor. For him, the issue went far beyond administrative technicalities or family harmony. It hit at the core foundation of his future reign. If rules could be bent for family members today, the integrity of the entire monarchy would be compromised tomorrow. He reportedly demanded a total, unvarnished accounting of every individual who had seen, approved, or acted upon the hidden memorandum. Yet the harder the legal team pressed for clear answers, the more elusive the truth became. Staff members who were questioned about the document provided evasive, careful responses drafted to protect their own positions. Written correspondence from the period was frustratingly sparse, consisting of cryptic email chains that referenced private telephone calls and offline discussions. It seemed as though whoever created the secondary framework had deliberately left a trail of breadcrumbs that led everywhere and nowhere at the same time. By late evening, the sitting room was filled with the haze of exhaustion and unspoken fear. The legal advisors sat surrounded by piles of historical estate charters, constitutional references, and modern privacy laws. The question was no longer just about who had walked onto royal property or who had signed a security ledger. The mystery had evolved into a high-stakes struggle for authority within the royal household itself. As the meeting prepared to adjourn without a clear resolution, a low knock sounded at the door. A junior clerk walked into the silent room, carrying a small, ribbon-tied leather dossier that had just been pulled from the deepest archive vaults beneath Windsor Castle. The clerk placed the dossier onto the mahogany table directly in front of Prince William. The legal advisors leaned forward, their faces pale, holding their breath in total silence. One final document rested inside that sealed folder, an original piece of correspondence that had remained hidden for over a decade, and it contained the power to determine whether this explosive controversy was merely an administrative blunder, an ethical betrayal, or something far worse. The wooden chair scraped sharply across the floor as King Charles stood up from his desk, turning his back on the assembled advisors to stare out into the darkening palace courtyard. The silence in the private study was suffocating. On the desk behind him, the unsealed ribbon-tied dossier lay open, its yellowed pages revealing an administrative precedent that no one in the room had anticipated. The internal review had reached its absolute endpoint. There were no more archives to unlock, no more security server logs to retrieve, and no more legal opinions left to request. The full scope of the audit was now laid bare across the table, binding the monarch, his heir, and their legal counsel in a trap of their own making. "We cannot undo past assumptions," the king said, his voice quiet, heavy with an overwhelming fatigue. "We can only decide how the crown moves forward from this night." The final findings of the internal inquiry did not support the sensational criminal allegations circulating across social media and tabloid headlines. There was no grand conspiracy, no stolen fortune, and no proven illegal operation operating within the gates of Sandringham or Windsor. Yet the reality exposed by the investigation was, in many ways, far more damaging to the internal foundation of the monarchy. The review proved that for over a decade, estate governance had been plagued by competing lines of administrative authority. Informal verbal permissions given in private rooms had routinely overridden formal written protocols. The private administrative office tied to Tom Parker Bowles had operated under the genuine belief that their access was fully authorized by long-standing internal custom. Simultaneously, estate wardens and legal custodians had operated under the belief that those exact same actions constituted an unprecedented breach of constitutional governance. It was a total institutional failure. Two parallel systems of authority had existed side by side for years without ever formally acknowledging each other until a single misplaced log entry forced them into a catastrophic head-on collision. Outside the palace walls, public reaction had reached a fever pitch. Front pages speculated daily on impending arrests, secret police investigations, and bitter feuds that threatened to tear the royal family apart. Commentators demanded immediate public statements, urging the palace to clarify whether the monarch's private land had been improperly used for personal gain. Yet inside the quiet corridors, the emotional cost of the scandal was taking a devastating toll. The personal strain between King Charles and Prince William was visible to everyone who entered the private quarters. William stood firm on his insistence that institutional accountability must take priority over family protection. He pushed for sweeping, public administrative reforms that would strip all non-working family members of informal privileges, standardizing estate access under strict public guidelines. King Charles, caught between his duties as sovereign and his loyalty as a husband and father, faced an impossible emotional choice. To institute William's aggressive reforms immediately would be viewed by the public as a tacit admission of guilt, publicly humiliating Queen Camilla's son and casting a permanent shadow over the family. To resist those reforms, however, meant risking a deep, permanent rift with his son and successor while leaving the institution vulnerable to future governance scandals. Every conversation between the sovereign and his heir was reported to be tense, brief, and weighed down by an agonizing emotional distance. The atmosphere inside the palace was no longer defined by royal grandeur, but by absolute isolation. Longtime staff members described working in an environment where every document was double-checked, every phone call was treated with suspicion, and warm personal relationships had been replaced by cold, legal precision. If you are listening to this tragic breakdown of family trust and institution, and you choose to walk away right now without subscribing, you are proving that you care nothing for the truth when it gets difficult. You are choosing to let powerful institutions sweep their failures under the rug while you look the other way. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on all notifications, and force your voice into the comment section below, because remaining silent only makes you complicit in the secrets they keep. The legal team presented their final recommendations to the sovereign. They advised against public statements regarding criminal conduct, as no evidence of criminality existed. Instead, they proposed a total overhaul of the private estate management structure, dissolving the secondary administrative framework and revoking all informal access privileges across every royal property. It was an administrative victory for Prince William's vision of a modernized, transparent monarchy, but it arrived at a terrible personal cost. As the late-night meeting drew to a close, advisors began packing their leather cases, preparing to draft the formal internal directives that would permanently alter how royal estates were managed. The tension in the study slowly began to ease, replaced by a cold, quiet resignation. The internal review had officially concluded, the structural vulnerabilities had been identified, and the institutional reforms were set in motion. Yet as the senior legal counsel closed the final dossier and slid it back into his briefcase, he paused, his eyes lingering on a single handwritten note attached to the very back cover of the file. The investigation was finished, and the institutional answers had been documented, but one single unanswered question remained, waiting in the dark to challenge everything they thought they had just resolved. A single yellowed slip of paper slipped out from the back of the archive file, fluttering softly down to land beside the king's velvet slippers. The legal counsel froze, his hand suspended in mid-air above his leather briefcase. The room held its breath. Prince William stepped forward, reaching down to pick up the forgotten page. It was a private, handwritten memorandum dated years before the estate controversy ever surfaced. As his eyes scanned the faded ink, the entire foundation of the scandal shifted in an instant. The document was not an administrative approval, nor was it a clearance form. It was a direct, confidential directive written in the hand of a senior sovereign official, explicitly stating that authority over private estate access was intended to remain permanently ambiguous to protect delicate diplomatic arrangements. In that single instant, the entire narrative collapsed into a far more complex reality. The fierce accusations, the sensational rumors of criminal conduct, and the bitter claims that Tom Parker Bowles, or non-working family members, had unlawfully seized royal authority were revealed to be grounded in a vast, historical misunderstanding. The controversy had never been born from criminal intent or deliberate defiance. It was the predictable, explosive result of conflicting interpretations of an intentionally ambiguous system of authority created decades prior. The central mystery driving the royal drama was solved, yet it offered no easy comfort. It exposed a monarchy whose greatest enemy was not external malice, but its own long history of quiet compromises and blurred boundaries. The public debate over accountability, governance, and the protection of the monarch's private interests would continue to echo through newsrooms and living rooms worldwide. Trust inside the royal household had been fractured, administrative lines had been redrawn, and the emotional distance between a father and his son remained a silent scar behind closed palace doors. If you choose to turn off this screen right now and pretend that these institutions do not shape the world around you, you are willingly allowing yourself to be fed sanitized fairy tales. You are handing your power away to those who thrive in secrecy. Subscribe to this channel this exact second, turn on all notification alerts, and make your voice heard in the comments section below, because if you remain passive, you deserve to be left in the dark. Yet as the palace staff quietly closed the files and turned off the lights in the estate administration office, one final, terrifying detail came to light. The handwritten directive found at the bottom of the dossier carried an official tracking stamp, proving it was only the first page of a two-part confidential order. The second page, containing the specific names of individuals granted total unchecked access across all Crown properties, is missing from the royal archives. In our very next investigation, we reveal the identity of the forgotten palace official who quietly removed that second page from Windsor Castle just 48 hours before the audit began, and the shocking contents of the document that could tear down the modern image of the Prince of Wales forever. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what comes next.